be honored if you would join us.
Greetings and welcome to another episode of Film Stories. I'm Dan Cooper and today is Halloween. So as it's Halloween, I thought we'd do something a little bit spooky and take a look at 1968's Night of the Living Dead, the all-father of zombie films. I was listening to Simon's World War Z because he's British, podcast a little while ago, and he got me thinking just about how a genre film like that, a zombie movie, could have so much money thrown at it to in the 21st century for the ending to test well with audiences. There's a film that really the final negative cost. I forget Simon's exact figure, but it was a scandalous amount of money. Yet if you trace the zombie lineage all the way back, trace that DNA all the way back to its root, and you have 1968's Night of the Living Dead, a true independent film that was made for something around $100,000. Really chicken feed compared to the big business that zombie movies and video games and TV have become. The film itself had really inauspicious beginnings. It was simply made, but there was a band of filmmakers led by George A. Romero, who tragically died last year, of course. A band of filmmakers who tried a few different things and decided they wanted to try their hand at a feature film. Originally, they looked at kind of putting together an idea for an alien comedy, but when they began to budget it, it came in way too high. Romero had been reading I Am Legend, and as they sharpened their drafts up, they hit upon this idea of flesh eating, and that was the hook for him. That was the element of the story that really grabbed him, and from there on, they began to build the idea of Night of the Flesh Eaters. Yes, that's right, not Night of the Living Dead. It was originally known as Night of the Flesh Eaters, but we'll come back to that in a moment because it is a significant part of the story. Speaking of the story, there will be a spoiler later on, but I will flag it up. It is a 50-year-old film, so I'm pretty sure the statute of limitations is out, but I shall flag it up nonetheless in case you want to avoid that. The film itself, I mean, they tried to make it as cheaply as possible. As I said, it cost $100K to make $100,000, but they saved money wherever possible. They shot it over, I think, 7 months, as when they could afford it. Pretty much, they shot it in black and white to save cost on the negative. What Romero and his team wouldn't do was compromise on the story. They again, we'll come to that in a moment. The style that they shot it in was this beautiful blend of kind of cinema verite and German expressionism. When you go back and watch the film now, it's undoubtedly a classic, and it does so many things so well. But it is, in some ways, and Romero was the first to admit this, it is crudely cut in some ways, especially the editing. Some of the continuity cuts, in particular, it's lacking in a natural rhythm, I suppose. But there's no getting around the fact that it is beautiful. It borrows a lot from German expressionism. You have the canted angles in there. The sets are quite angular, and you've got that really beautiful, artful use of shadow. It was a bunch of filmmakers really cutting their teeth as they went along. Somehow they got this film made with the help of their friends, by shooting it where and when they had the cash. They somehow got the film made and put together. And whilst Romero was adamant that it was never the case originally, the casting of Dwayne Johnson as Ben, an African American in the lead role, was, for the time, it was quite an avant-garde decision. And Romero did always insist that the casting of Jones was simply because of merit, that he was the best actor for the job. But either way, the casting at a time when racial tensions were at a peak. I mean, remember the Detroit riots happened, and really brought to the fore the simmering race relations in America. The film was able to, through its story, through its casting, and of course the ending, the film was able to elevate those themes and issues. Jordan Peele, the director of Get Out, which for my money was the best film of 2017, hands down. He's talked about how the racial politics of Night of the Living Dead were instrumental in inspiring him as a filmmaker. I mean, not least with Get Out. He argued in that film it's the racial paranoia that the character Chris in that film is feeling that gives him the edge, gives him the ability to think faster and outsmart his hunters. And he cites the Night of the Living Dead as being the key influence in kind of creating that idea, with the idea that the character of Ben in Night of the Living Dead is a character that is an African American in 1968, so living in fear is a daily occurrence for him. So when the zombies attack, when the flesh eaters attack, we'll get back to that in a moment. For him, he's more equipped to deal with the fear, having lived with it every day of his life. So, interesting casting. The film itself, as I said, was originally titled Night of the Flesh Eaters. When it released, they couldn't originally get a distributor because of the ending. Here's that spoiler that I alluded to earlier on. So if you haven't seen the ending, you're planning to, then it's widely known, but now's the time to turn off. When the end of the film, when the kind of zombie outbreak is defeated, remember in this film as well, the zombie outbreak is cited from being space against another social fear that zombie movies have always been kind of credited with tapping into social fears, and this film really kind of covered them all. Not references to, but an allegory for Vietnam, the Cold War, perhaps, certainly race relations in America at the time, and the space race too, as the zombie outbreak is sourced from an alien mutation picked up from an American spacecraft that flies around Venus, I think. But either way, the spoiler. So when Ben, the character of Ben, the black man, the hero of the film, is killed at the end, kind of senselessly, or without even being recognised as a human being. The ending was stark. The ending was brutal, and distributors didn't want it. And in the end, but the filmmakers wouldn't compromise. They'd compromise with, I suppose, black and white over colour. They'd compromise with shooting it over so many months, but they wouldn't compromise in the ending. Dwayne Jones, who played Ben, had said that Romero was possibly thinking about changing the ending, but he lobbied for the director to keep that original ending because the fact that the film was already, I suppose, a subversion insofar of a typical narrative arc insofar that it had cast a black man as the hero, and then it almost subverted it itself by then killing the hero, and that double impact, if you like, was enough. Well, to give the film that legendary ending that still hits hard even to this day. But distributors didn't want it, but the filmmakers are adamant that they weren't going to change it, and in the end they ended up going to an independent distributor rather than taking a better deal because they believed in the ending, and it was a canny move in the end. When the film released, it actually released without a certificate. The MPAA, who didn't actually start certifying films in terms of age certifications until I think it was the same year, but later in the year. So the film released to, believe it or not, the film released to matinee screenings of young teenagers, possibly even children. And you can imagine that it scared the pants off them because it's a scary film, and it's also a film without peers, or at the time it's certainly a film without peers. So these imagine, if you will, these children sitting in the theatre expecting to see something quite tame, and then the film just gets darker and darker and darker. And Roger Ebert himself, the late wonderful film critic Roger Ebert, saw the film at one such showing, and he was flabbergasted at just how scary it was and how terrifying it was for the people there, who were completely unprepared for what they were about to see. It wasn't called Night of the Flesh Eaters, though, when it finally released. because an earlier film, I think just named The Flesh Eaters, had objected to their use of the name, so they changed it to Night of the Living Dead. However, when they changed it to Night of the Living Dead, somebody somewhere forgot to transfer the copyright. So, as you may or may not be aware, the film actually released and went into the public domain. It's one of the most successful films of all time, never to actually be copyrighted. And the film, belongs in the public domain. Romero and the other filmmakers did try and unsuccessfully to gain back the copyright, but it was without success. They even commissioned, and I think Romero produced a remake in 1990 with Todd Terry starred in it, and part of the reason for having a go at remaking the film was to try and underline those copyright claims. The film itself was pretty poorly received, although I'm quite a fan of it. And Romero, of course, would go on to revisit his zombie universe several times throughout his career. So, it's Halloween. Trick or treat. Maybe I'm hoping that was more of the latter variety. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed it. A little revisit of Night of the Living Dead. That's been another film story. Before I go, let me just urge you to please subscribe, share, like. It really does help us. We are a tiny organisation, but everything you can do for us just to give us a little bit of publicity really helps. We've got a Kickstarter at the moment, a Kickstarter campaign to turn film stories into a real-life magazine. And if you haven't checked it out yet, please, the link will be below. Just go and have a look at it. If you want more information, you can find the website at filmstories.co.uk. The Twitter account is @filmstoriespod. Thank you so much for everything that you do. Happy Halloween!